Close your eyes if you like, and just let's sit together in peace for about 2 minutes. Now, shall we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance if you are able? Commissioner.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to remind everyone that if you would like your name to be placed in the minutes, to make sure that you indicate it to our staff who are not only counting the time for the speakers, but also keeping a record of the meeting. And I want to remind everyone that we want to have a safe and very encouraging and, of course, always lively conversations and discussions and presentations, and just want to invite everyone to be respectful and listen to one another. Sometimes there's emotion, there's passion, and all of that is normal. But if we allow the people to speak their minds, and then you take your turn, and everyone's respectful, then we'll be able to listen to everyone, hear each other, and conduct the important business of the commission. So thanks very much in advance for that. So we want to approve the minutes of the October 22nd, 2019 minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion or any public comments on the minutes of last month? Okay, hearing none, I'll call a vote. Everyone in favor of adopting the October minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Thank you so much. Let's turn to agenda item number 2, a presentation by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner-Coroner. During the research that we conducted by the Family Assistance and Communication and Ad Hoc Committee regarding the fatal use of force, it became apparent that the coroner had a specific role to play at the scene and subsequent to that, the scene of an incident. We're fortunate enough to have the current Los Angeles County Medical Examiner-Coroner, Dr. Jonathan R. Lucas, with us this morning to give us an overview of the department and its role following fatal uses of force. Good morning, Dr. Lucas. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Good morning to the commission. Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity to be here and speak to you today. I kind of want to just give a little overview of kind of what we do, the scope of our authority, and specifically how it plugs into fatal use of force and in custody deaths in general. So we'll go to the next slide. So we investigate, first of all, our jurisdiction covers the entire county geographically. So there's no, as I'm sure you know, there's no municipal counterpart, there's no city medical examiner. We cover the boundary. So we deal with all the municipalities. And we are required by state law to determine the cause and manner of death for certain types of deaths that are defined by both the government code and the health and safety code. In a nutshell, it's really all violent, sudden, unusual, unattended deaths and unattended deaths, suicides, accidents, homicides. These include fatal use of force. Anything that is not a natural death. But it also specifically says we are to investigate any in-custody death. And this includes even somebody who's, say, has health problems and is in the hospital but under or in custody, but the cause of death is clear, say liver problems or things like that. We are required to take jurisdiction on those cases. And then we also take jurisdiction on cases of public health concern. And then there's a whole variety of other ones as well. Next. So what does that look like? So this is sort of the universe of deaths in LA County, if you will. Again, geographic county. There's about 60,000 people that die every year from all causes in LA County. That number is pretty consistent from year to year. And based on those statutes, we investigate about 10,000 of those 60,000. The other 50,000 are all natural deaths and all handled by community physicians. Of the 10,000, and it's sort of broken out on the pie chart to the right, that's what it looks like, our workload for the year, if you will. My point with that is that almost half of our cases are natural deaths. Almost half of our deaths are accidents, drug overdoses, traffic fatalities, things like that. We've got some suicides, homicides, and some cases that we can't make determinations on. So the universe of the work we do is a subset of the deaths in the county, but very specialized. And the in-custody deaths and the use of force related fatalities are a very small subset of what we do. They obviously they're a lot of work, but I just want to give you the context of what our office is doing on a daily basis. Probably one of the most important things about our department is we are a completely independent agency from the district attorney, the sheriff's department, and any other county department. Obviously, we're not part of any city. I am appointed by the board of supervisors. And just to state the obvious, we don't work for the sheriff, we don't work for the DA, and we work for the board. And our independence is one of the most important things that we value about our office. Next, please. So I put this slide together. It says responsibilities and fatal use of force. But in reality, I read through it again, and actually, this is our responsibility in every case, but it also applies to fatal use of force as well. So our ultimate goal is to determine the cause of death and something called the manner of death, right? That's a single word that represents the circumstances of death, suicide or homicide or accident or natural. But in determining cause and manner of death, we perform a scene investigation. It's limited to the body and the area, the sort of the relevant areas of the scene pertaining to the body. We perform a postmortem examination. In the context of, again, in custody, use of force deaths, we do autopsies, but we may not. In other cases, we may not do an autopsy. We'll perform ancillary testing as necessary, including x-rays, microscopic work, toxicology testing. And then ultimately, our deliverables are the death certificate, the state death certificate, which lists the cause and manner of death, and then our reports. We generally produce 3 types of reports: our investigative report, our toxicology report, and autopsy report. And these are all public documents, and I'm going to loop back to that a little bit later, a couple slides from now. We'll talk about that. Next slide, please. This is more of our responsibilities. We are also responsible for establishing the identity of the decedent, the person that died. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, but that is something that we have to establish. And then we are also responsible for locating and notifying the next of kin that the death occurred. And I'll just sort of sidebar here for a second that in cases where there's a lot of law enforcement involvement, sometimes the notification has already occurred through law enforcement means, which is fine, but we just need to make sure that it occurred. But ultimately, we have the statutory responsibility for that. And then finally, to preserve and collect evidence on the body. That's kind of a general sense, and again, like I said, I wrote this as a fatal use of force responsibility, but really we do this in every single case. Next slide, please. There's a few things we don't do. We don't determine whether law enforcement followed proper procedures. We do not determine and I put these words in quotes intentionally, guilt or innocence of the people involved. We also do not provide viewing of the body at our facility. We're not set up for it. We're not the right environment for it. That is to be done at the mortuary. Occasionally is done at the scene where the death occurs. So that's just a nutshell. Let me, next slide, please. I want to talk about getting access to the body. This is the family. Well, this is us getting access, to the body, both at the death scene, and then we're going to talk about after the scene has been sort of cleared. When a death occurs out in the community, outside, on the street, or in a house, we must allow the investigative law enforcement agency to have a reasonable amount of time to conduct their investigation. So a lot of the times when an incident occurs, we're notified right early on in the first hour or two. Sometimes we're not, but most of the time we are. And at that point we're said, this incident occurs, we're gonna need you, but law enforcement agency, we need to do an investigation. We need to collect evidence, we need to take photography, and et cetera. Only when the investigation reaches a certain point is it appropriate for us to be at the scene. Now, this is sometimes an issue where the body is outside for 6, 7, 8 hours, sometimes even more. The point here is that we may know about the death. We could even respond to the scene, but we wouldn't have access to that body until law enforcement has conducted their investigation. So a lot of times the delay is misattributed to our office. When we do get the second call to say, we're ready for you, our response time is very quick because we're waiting for it. So half hour, 1 hour, whatever, LA traffic, that's how long it takes us to get to that scene when we are notified the second time. But often there's we're misattributed as being the cause for, we're waiting for the coroner, or the coroner, where's the coroner? I know that media makes these allegations at times just without knowing, but the point is the investigation has to occur and then we respond when the time is appropriate. Next slide, please. After the death scene, body will come to our facility, our secure facility in Boyle Heights. We have a single place where this occurs throughout the county. We'll do a postmortem exam, almost always an autopsy in these cases. And like I said before, the viewing of the body by the public or the family is not practical and is not permitted at our facility. The body is then, when the family has picked a funeral home, we release the body to the funeral home. So that's that part of it there. This can happen. I could spend some time talking about the time frame this occurs in. There's been times in the past where this has been many, many, many days. There's been times recently that I can remember it's just been the next day. And we'll talk about this at the end. This is an area of focus for us. The time that we can get that body to our facility, get the exam done, that's our time frame to make the body available to the family. That's the time frame we're trying to compress. Ideally, I want to have that happening the next day, the day after the death occurs. Next slide, please. So our reports, as I said, we have those 3 reports. Sometimes they're referred to collectively as the coroner report, but really it's 3 reports: autopsy, toxicology, and investigative. These are public documents. Anybody can request them, and we're required by law to provide them. However, pursuant to Government Code 6254, the law enforcement agency can request a security hold be placed on information around the case, and this is meant to secure the information, to make sure that we aren't releasing information that might compromise an investigation. So we are bound by this. It's not discretionary on our part. And when we receive that security hold request in writing, we do then abide by it. And once the security hold is released, then we can release our reports to the public. And again, I mention this because I do know that we have been asked, why are you covering up for law enforcement by not releasing the reports? And that's not at all what's happening. It's specifically delineated in government code, and as I said, it's not discretionary for us to do that. And certainly, when we have that released, the security hold released, we do release all the reports. Next slide. I know this is, I just want to mention this here for completeness. I know there's another presentation on this. All of the things that I'm talking about, I've come to the conclusion that it's normal for people not to understand what we do. It is absolutely normal. People don't understand how the moving parts are, how the information flows, and that's okay. Part of, especially in a case where there's a use of force death or any in custody death, there's a lot of information coming from different angles. And again, I'm not going to get into the presentation that's next, but the Family Assistance Program that the county board passed by motion back in July has been an effort to help the communication of all these issues that I'm discussing be conveyed to the family in those early hours and understand kind of what's happening. Next slide. So I'm new here. I've been here about 2.5 years in LA County. I didn't come from within this department. I wasn't in LA County before that. Well, back in the 90s I was here, but I was in another county prior to this. So we have been working hard for the last couple of years on improving our operation. We are not perfect. Sometimes we take too long. Sometimes we miscommunicate things. But we are working on doing that. We are working on improving our staffing, which we have quite a bit. We're almost fully staffed in many key areas. We're working on quality improvement in general and diminishing our turnaround times, especially in that first 24, 48 hours of getting the exam done so the family can move on with their funeral or whatever they need to do. This is a huge focus for us. It's been this way for a couple of years. We've made a lot of progress, and we still have some stones unturned, which is hopeful, so we're going to keep going, and we're almost where we need to be. We're also focusing, with a lot of help from my Chief Deputy Paul Parker here, on customer service and community engagement in general. These are just areas that we can do better on, and so we've been really trying to focus on these areas, because I think there's a lot to be gained there. So I think that's the last slide, or there's one more slide, just a thank you slide. And I'll just open up. Anybody have any questions at this point?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Lucas. It's and I'm so glad to hear that you actually are determined to educate the public on all the formalities you have, the regulations that you have, because I think it's always been a mysterious, the coroner. Where's the coroner? The coroner's coming. How come we're not responded to? And I know that in our working on our different ad hoc committees, of course, the role of the medical examiner-coroner it keeps coming up. And I know that our commissioners, when we met with your team, were delighted to know how you function, how this important department functions. And it shouldn't be mysterious. Obviously, it's very sensitive, dealing with the families, dealing with the public, and the work that you all do. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for being committed to illuminating all of us. And I like the fact that you want to actually view customer service as a role that you have, and that you're concentrating on the turnaround time. So I'm going to open it up for questions from the commissioners, but I do have one question, and that is, on average, since in these cases you have to do, one of your reports is the autopsy, right? You have to do that. How long does that take? Never mind how long it takes you to get the body and start, but how long would an average autopsy take?
So our performance metric is 90% of our reports completed in 90 days. So I don't have an average number. I know that's not an average, and I don't know the average because for performance management, it's not our best metric. But 90% in 90 days is our goal, and sometimes it's much sooner than that. I will say that I'll acknowledge the history of this office, which is that we have had huge backlogs, and toxicology is always to blame. Well, that is true in many cases in the past. I will say that due to staffing and some really excellent work by our chief toxicologist or chief of labs, our turnaround time in labs is about 90% in 60 days. So that's the toxicology component, which used to be the longest pole in the tent, if you will. My point with all of that is that we are doing much better than our sort of reputation has suggested. 90% in 90 days is our goal, though, for the reports.
That's for the report. In terms of doing your due diligence in gathering all that material and evidence and testing and dealing with the body of the deceased, at what point does that body then get released? Is it 90 days? We don't wait. I know we don't wait for the report. So how long is that initial effort?
Yeah, in fact, that's a great question, because a lot of people assume we tell them it's going to take 90 days for the report. And they think, oh my gosh, you're going to have our loved one for 90 days, and that is absolutely not the case. Our entire operation, in fact, that of the entire forensic pathology and death investigation industry, is to get the body in and out within the shortest amount of time, like a day or two. But part of what we do is to collect the evidence that we need up front, like we draw toxicology specimens, we take our photographs, whatever we need to do, so that the body can be buried or even cremated, and we've got everything we need just in that first day and a half. So the goal is the body's only with us for a short period of time. That's where we need to be, and we're much better at that now. But it has nothing to do with the report.
Okay, I'm sorry, I do have one more. I'm fascinated by this. And I have this question, I want to say that I want to give a trigger warning on this question, because I think it's sensitive. Are there times when body parts are retained by the medical examiner and not all completely, body put back together and delivered to the families?
Yes, we are. In every single case, we do take tiny pieces. This is routine, and we keep them for for microscopic studies. This is a very small. These are biopsies. You can think of it as biopsies. In some cases, it is necessary to retain it's almost always the brain for further examination. For proper examination to establish cause and manner of death. And that is almost always, I personally wouldn't characterize that as body part, but it is a body part. But the term body part does conjure other images. But the brain is the part that we usually have to retain. When we retain anything from the body, it's usually the brain.
And then once the report, that 90 days report is completed and published, what happens to the brain?
We do keep it for a period of time, and then it's disposed of.
It's disposed of. Do the families know that when that is occurring, that if you've had to retain the brain for further study? Do the families know that when the body is released to them?
They don't know that as a proactive thing on the front end.
Okay.
But it will be part of the report. It is part of the report. It's documented.
Okay. So they wouldn't know that?
They wouldn't know that.
They wouldn't know that. Okay. All right, thank you. I want to open it up to other commissioner questions. Yes.
Not so much a question, but just a comment on line with what Commissioner Giggins was just talking about. I hope you will look at your policy in regards to that specific issue. This commission had a young woman come before us many months ago, and she was distraught beyond belief, very traumatized by that very fact. And if that had at least been communicated to her, as opposed to getting that information in a report 90 days thereafter, it would have gone a long way towards taking care of her trauma. So I would hope that the coroner's office would look at that. That might be something you might want to have your coroner investigator, or I guess that would be a question I have, is who is designated at your office to interface with the family when it comes to releasing the body? Is it a coroner investigator or someone else?
The investigator is probably the main point of contact. Our physician staff would also be a person that I would expect as needed to speak with families. I know as a physician myself, I've spoken to families my whole career, so those would be the main 2 points of contact.
Okay, well, whomever that point of contact may be, just this particular issue, like I say, I think is something that you need to look at as maybe a policy issue that we might want to make sure that is made aware, the family's made aware of that fact, and it'll avoid a lot of trauma going forward. Thank you.
Inspector General?
Yes, if I could just add, what the medical examiner is referring to relates to the Family Assistance Program, which you're receiving a presentation on. Miriam Brown is here from DMH to talk about that. And the plan in the Family Assistance Program is for DMH to become the lead in contact with families of people who have passed away for a number of reasons, and to assist in just this role. The coroner's office has been part of a group, the medical examiner's office has been part of a group that has been working on that, and they have been very helpful in working on that. But there's still, as I think you've heard from our presentation, a bunch of issues that we hope to make progress on: notification, viewing of loved ones, and information. And so I'm hopeful that when this gets working right, the DMH person will be communicating with the medical examiner's office, will receive that information, and will get it to the family in a trauma-informed way, so that they get the most possible information. Same thing with the Sheriff's Department. Homicide has been working very closely with this group on working at what information can be given out, and ultimately the plan is to have that information then be elevated to the Sheriff's office, the Sheriff, to decide when to invoke privacy and secrecy rules, and when to allow information to go out under the new rules under 832.7 regarding shootings, and with hopefully the benefit of putting out information that won't compromise an investigation, but will treat families as they are, people who've lost a loved one and want to know as much as they can about what's happening. So although you're hearing a professional and sort of detailed description of the way the process has worked in the past, it's our hope that it'll become a much more communicative and open process in the future with the assistance of DMH. Not to say that the coroner's office or medical examiner's office couldn't do it themselves, but we think the whole plan is for DMH, who are experts at this kind of thing, to help us all become a little more sensitive to people.
Right. Commissioner Kennedy?
Thank you for being here, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Can after the coroner has completed its autopsy report, can the families of people who were fatally shot by the police obtain a copy of that autopsy report?
As long as it's not under a security hold, absolutely.
Okay, because that's because the California Government Code makes it a public record, right?
It is a public record, yes.
So, and who requests the security hold?
It would be an individual with whatever investigating law enforcement agency. Usually it could be a homicide detective or a lieutenant.
Okay. And you said that California Government Code 6254F prevents the coroner from releasing it if I guess detective put a security hold on it?
Yes.
Does the code actually refer to the coroners as a law enforcement agency subject to the investigation records of a law enforcement exception under that code, or?
That I am not. Do you? I brought my expert, but to those details.
Specifically, good morning, everyone. Thanks again for having us. Specifically, as it relates to us, what matters is that a law is asking for certain pieces of information not to be released from us, our agency. So we are, unfortunately, we are obligatory. We have to not release that information because they're saying that if we do, it compromises the investigation. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, but the code refers to an exception to public records that applies to law enforcement agencies. And the doctor told us that the coroner, and it makes sense, is completely independent of the sheriff. So isn't it incumbent upon the sheriff to make an independent determination whether that's a proper invocation of the law enforcement exception? Because in some ways, when you think about it, the sheriff has a conflict of interest when it's a police shooting.
What I can say, Commissioner, is that we've also checked with our county council to make sure that we are following the proper protocols when it comes to the request to not release information, and we've been assured that we are doing exactly what we must do.
Okay. Is there a document from county council that sets forth its legal analysis? Because when I read 6254F, I don't see a non-discretionary obligation of the coroner to withhold a completed autopsy report from the next of kin. And the problem is, I have talked to families who have waited over a year to get their loved one's autopsy report, and it is devastating to them, and it also interferes with their ability to pursue their legal rights.
We understand everything that you're saying, and that is why we've asked for county counsel's opinion to make sure that we're following the law as we had thought it was, and we were assured that that is exactly what we should, and it is not permissive, it is an obligatory, that we must hold off on releasing that information.
So if I may address the issue, I would say that this is certainly something that we should bring back.
Yes.
And I will do that. Though I'm not representing a medical examiner, I'm happy to raise the issue and look into it internally.
Yeah, often, and I'm saying this to the public and out loud to all of us, when, in many of our presentations and in our inquiries, we get this, oh, the county council says, and we have to do what the county council says. So thank you for being willing to bring some information about this, but I think that we as a commission should consider more inquiry from the county council on a lot of the things that we're trying to move forward, because it's almost as if the voice of God comes down and says, you have to do it this way. And I'm not saying that the law doesn't say that, or the interpretation of the law doesn't give that directive, but then that means we have to go further and look at what then might be considered to be changed. Because I think that, I think you are absolutely, you're doing what you're supposed to do, and what you're doing is very sensitive. You have a sacred duty to treat these bodies with as much respect. And then as far as we're concerned, and I think as far as you're concerned, the families then, consequential to the families with as much respect as they deserve. So if there are obstacles, and we're discovering them a little bit every day working on the family assistance program, we want to overcome those obstacles, And so I think we as a group might have to be a little bit more, do a little more due diligence on the laws and who interprets the laws. And because you have all these independent groups, and then, the voice of God comes down and says, no, you got to do it this way. And that may be true. It may be the best thing. It may not be the best thing. So we're looking at things with different lenses now. And I think, I don't want to say it's open season on county council, but I think we have to open the door, open the windows. And so thank you so much. You think you might have something for our next meeting?
So what I suggest is that the medical examiner consult with his counsel, and I'll loop in.
Great.
To make sure that this is raised.
Yeah.
I do want to say that to broaden it out to all instances when someone invokes county council, it may be an
I accept that. I may be overreaching.
I certainly appreciate the need to look at these issues, particularly in context of the information that we are receiving.
Right.
So,
Yeah, sometimes to open a door, even a little, you have to bang on it loudly. So I think that's probably what I'm referring to. Thank you. I think you're next, and then.
Thank you, Dr. Lucas, for being here. By your own admission and full disclosure and transparency, that there's areas that you can do better in, the county medical examiner, i.e. community engagement, 24, 48-hour turnaround. My question is to you, what is the disconnect between the reputation of the county medical examiner and the reality that exists? Why is the reputation one thing and the reality is something else?
I think, now I'm speaking to something that, reputation, first of all, is a very difficult thing to change overnight. And by overnight, I mean 2.5 years. I would say that just looking back as an outsider, I think it's a combination of the mystery of the office, general mystery, and that people, and by no fault of their own, like I said, it's normal not to understand what we do. I think the sort of the mystery, the mystique of the office, combined with some facts that contributes to a bad reputation. Couple that with placing us in the middle of very sensitive issues like what we're discussing, And I think it very easily becomes a problem. As I said, I don't think it's without basis, but all I can do is say that we are listening and we are doing everything we can as fast as we can to improve. But we understand the issue. So, but I still think the reputation will take some time to turn around.
Thank you.
Okay. Next. Go ahead.
Dr. Lucas, with respect to the brain disposal, how is the brain disposed, or other body parts?
Any what's the term? Hazardous waste would go. I'm not sure the specifics, the actual mechanics of it, but it's done in a safe manner.
Do you consider cultural or religious practices with respect to a body part?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, at least from my reading in the past, for example, within the Jewish community, there's a problem that they collect every single body part. At least that's my understanding. I'm not a Jewish individual, so.
When there are religious considerations, we have a very intensive conversation on the front end. First of all, we have to know that there is a religious concern, and usually those are, I'm pretty confident those issues are brought forward regularly and consistently by the families, to my knowledge.
How would they learn after, if they're only seeing it in the autopsy report?
If there is a religious concern, we will take those into consideration on the front end. In other words, the autopsy may be limited. We wouldn't retain things that, we would try to make compromises for that with sensitivity around the religious concerns.
Has that ever happened?
I'm sure it has, but I can't think of it. I mean, we on routine cases, routinely, not outside the context of the nexus here, it is routine. Like every week we probably get a referral or concern from the Jewish community in particular, but others as well, about autopsy and the faith and how soon can they get the body, what's going to be done. I think this is just routine practice for us.
So at that point in time, you tell them that certain body parts are retained and disposed of?
Or we may not retain them.
Okay. Let me switch off from the brain. But when you have several fatalities occurring many times during the day or several days, is there a priority held with respect to the coroner working on those particular fatalities?
There certainly will be times when an investigation is time sensitive and we want to make sure we get to the exam as soon as possible. And absolutely, I think from time to time we will. If we get a rush, especially for a Jewish family in particular, where there's time constraints on burial and getting the body taken care of, we will try to get those cases through very quickly so that the family...
What I was thinking more is that there's a shooting in Boyle Heights, another shooting in South LA. Is there a priority set with respect to those fatalities?
No, not in that way.
So you do it ad seriatim as they come in?
We would do them as the law enforcement agencies available, as our staffing dictates. In the examples you cited, yes. We wouldn't prioritize one, say, shooting over another, depending on where they occurred. Or
Can law enforcement do that? Can they say we want this particular fatality investigated first?
Well, they can ask. We would simply take into account our own needs, unless there was a legitimate, unless there was a need that really affects that the investigation in the first day or so. We might do that just to get evidence, but we wouldn't do it just because we're getting competing requests from law enforcement to to move ahead with their case over somebody else's.
Well, I guess it's not competing law enforcement, but if a law enforcement agency says this is an important one because it involves, you know, a very difficult situation, like there are allegations that the person has been shot 16 times, would that take a little an earlier priority than someone that's found elsewhere and is just fatally shot?
Not necessarily. Like I said, if we wouldn't do it. If any prioritization occurred, it would because there would be a time-sensitive nature of an investigation, but it wouldn't be because we deem one case more important than another.
And who would make that time-sensitive decision?
Well, that's a discussion between our office and the law enforcement agency who's doing the investigation.
So you do set a priority, though, if you come up with a conclusion that it's a time-sensitive situation.
We control our casework, and we will make determinations as to when the case is going to occur. If law enforcement tells us that their case is due, they have evidence, they have time-sensitive nature, there's only information that can be gained from an autopsy, they can't move forward with a portion of their investigation because of that. Then we very well might try to assist in that investigation. But if it's simply, they want to get information from the case to just have more information, I don't know that we would necessarily do that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rubin, please.
Thank you again, Dr. Lucas. I have actually two questions, but let me pick up on Commissioner Kennedy's questions about Government Code Section 6254. Would you agree that in the majority of in-custody death cases and the majority of use of force cases that routinely law enforcement files a notice for a security hold?
I think that does, I don't know numbers, but that's my general sense.
Have you ever received a 6254 request from the district attorney that you know of?
We may have, but I'm not recalling specifically, but we may have.
Okay.
But I can't say yes or no.
So that it's really pretty routine that law enforcement requests the 6254 security hold on just, as you said, the majority of these kinds of cases. Is there a situation where, according to your county council's legal position, that the medical examiner has an opportunity to object to a security hold or the length of a security hold?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And has there been a situation, to your knowledge, where despite the fact that there's a security hold, that there at least are portions of the medical examiner's report that can be released to the family with the secure, I'm putting those in quotes,
redacted?
The secure information blacked out or redacted?
I'm not aware of that practice. I don't know that we're doing that. If we are, it's news to me, but I don't think we release anything.
Do you know the longest security hold that, since you've been chief medical examiner, the longest period of time under that kind of a hold that that you have encountered before an autopsy report is released?
No.
And just sort of switching gears a little bit. You set forth for us the limitation on your department's access to the crime scene, and that is really dependent on the initial investigation by the investigating agency and when they've notified you.
Yes.
Have you had, or has the department had any discussions with law enforcement about how to protect the body during the period of time that law enforcement is conducting their investigation?
Yes, we have. We do ask that the body be sort of hidden from view as best as possible, or at least covered by something to protect. Well, there's some practical issues with sort of being in direct sunlight.
Right.
That's one, but also just the direct view of people in general. We just request that occur. And yeah, so this is a conversation that we do have with law enforcement agencies on a regular basis. We say access to the body, but there are some practical limitations. But as soon as possible, that's what we request.
Right.
Yeah.
But in your requests for how the body is protected, and certainly you're mentioning sunlight is a perfect example because things begin to deteriorate even more. Are you aware whether law enforcement follows those requests, or you don't know?
I know that they do from time to time. I don't have any sense of how often.
Thank you.
Dr. Lucas, I think what might help us is if you could find out in, say, the last 5 years with these fatal shootings that have occurred, how many of those have had security holds? I mean, if we could know that, that would be based on data. And we know if it's a practice for every time, or occasional, or infrequently, because I think that's what we're trying to determine. So that would be helpful to us.
Okay.
You could find that out for us.
See if that's doable.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. Mr. Williams.
Dr. Lucas, just a quick question. As I'm sure you know, the county jail holds a substantial number of homeless persons who unfortunately pass away while they're in custody. And I'm wondering what your procedure is in terms of homeless families or homeless folks who pass away in custody, and what exactly happens with the remains after they pass away if there's no family or friends to take hold of the body.
I'll sort of back into that from if there's no family, or if there is family and the family is unwilling or to take control of the body, we can send the body to county cremation and go through that process. But there's a lot of due diligence that happens before that point, and it's not limited to homeless individuals or deaths that occur in the jail by any means. It's not a big number, but it does. There is a method for that, because there are people that sometimes we just can't find folks. The process is very similar to any other. The fact that they're homeless doesn't really change much. We still look for next of kin. We still make sure we know who they are. I mean, if they're in the jail, presumably we would know. And if it's an in-custody death, if it occurs in a cell, then we would handle that like any other case.
And one additional question associated with that: if they had belongings with them when they were arrested, or their belongings are somewhere in storage perhaps, what happens with those belongings?
In routine cases, we would manage that property and then release it to the legal next of kin. If there's a law enforcement agency investigating, they may take that property and take possession of the property. But it just depends on the case. But vast majority of our cases, we control the property and then release it to legal next of kin.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioners? Any questions? I have one more. You're being so patient. Thank you so much. This is obviously, we know so little, so this is great. When a body is released to a family, say, or a mortuary, I don't know, that's a better question. The body is about to be released, either to the mortuary or to a family. What is that process? How does that happen? Whether it's, and also if it's in custody, what happens?
So, irrespective of whether or not there's a law enforcement involved death, the release process is the same. It's all about, it really starts and stops with the family. The family has to make arrangements they have to pick a funeral home. They're private companies. We have nothing to do with them. We also can't really force the issue. We can work with the family. Have you found a mortuary? Having trouble? What? But then once the family chooses a mortuary, then they give the mortuary or the funeral home authorization to come pick up the body from us. We would not release a body to a family straight up. It has to go through the mortuary with the family's authorization. So when the mortuary comes, we do a check, we make sure the identification's right, and then we release.
Okay.
And that again, that can happen the day after, 2 days later, 3 days later, after the death occurs. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much. The Inspector General brought up how we're in this process of developing this program, and I felt it was an historic day that we were all there at the Board of Supervisors when they passed their resolution to move ahead and create the Family Assistance Program, and you were there.
Yes.
It was great to have the coroner there. The Department of Public Health was there. The head of the Department of Public Health, Dr. Ferrer, was there. Department of Mental Health, Dr. Sharon was there, and the sheriff was represented, and then COC, we were all there. And when I looked around and saw the support that our department leadership had for the creation of this family assistance program, which came to us from the families themselves and from the community groups who had organized those families so that they could tell their stories and ask for the support that they deserve. I felt it was a pretty historic moment in LA County being able to actually create a best practice that could be a model for the country, because as far as we know, it really doesn't exist, especially as thorough as we're trying to create. So thank you so much for wanting to be part of this future communication and assistance program for these families.
You're very welcome, and I fully support that family assistance program. I applaud the commission for doing a lot of the background work on that and getting it set up, and all the other partners. So we just look for, it's still early, but we look forward to ironing it out and just making it better with time.
Let me just ask one.
Sure,
I hate to have been sitting here and not ask a question, but I do have one, and that is, first of all, Dr. Lucas, if I understand your testimony correctly, you've indicated that anytime the coroner does an autopsy, the brain is removed. Is that correct or not?
No.
Oh,
okay.
If we do a complete autopsy, the brain will be removed, but only a small subset of that, very small, would we ever retain the brain.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was just wondering what, I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to turn to public comment. We have
two speakers.
two speakers.
Regi Bunch, followed by Michelle Infante.
Good morning, Commission. I want to thank you for the sincerity brought to this topic. It is definitely long overdue. I have more questions I would love to have answered, so I'm going to bring them here in this public moment. Is the medical examiner working with third parties outside of law enforcement? I ask that question because there are reports coming back that like organ donor agencies, hospitals in need of a heart, etc., can reach out to the coroner. And what does that, if that is true, what does that process look like? And is there a whistleblower process in the medical examiner's office where anyone in that office can exclaim any type of abuse going on or misconduct? Another question I have is, do families pay any medical examiner costs? For example, when they come to pick up the body at the scene, are there any costs associated with that? And if so, how much? And my other question, I have a whole bunch of questions. How often does the medical examiner correct reports? There's one I definitely need an answer for because it shocked me when I heard it. There was a family that said, this was back in 2012, that after their nephew was killed, the family had to come to the crime scene and clean up the blood on the street. And if that's true, there's an answer for that. Thank you.
Thank you. All very good questions.
Good morning, Commissioners. I think that the LA County Coroner's Office has a very long way to go before everything is perfect, and they should worry less about their reputation and start worrying about their processes, because there's a lot of problems there. When you talk about security holds, families don't know that their autopsy reports are on security hold, and there's nothing to tell them. So I have to say thank you to the coroner. I've had a discussion about that, and I'm hoping that they'll put on their website a spot where people will know that that their cases are on a security hold, and they're referred to the Sheriff's Department, and also when they have updates, because there's nothing for the families to know or have an understanding of how that process is. I would encourage you to start thinking about oversight for the county coroner. It's a matter of accountability and transparency, just like the Sheriff's Department. I have to say, one of the things that I'm very surprised at, I've been reading about 50 reports, and it's very shocking. And I think that you should read them, because there are things in there like the decedent being redressed, and an unknown person has come along and redressed them, and there's no accountability as to that person and where that's evidence if someone's clothes has been taken off, and there's no accountability for that. And so I'm reading these autopsy reports, and I'm seeing all kinds of problems with them. And as a matter of fact, I've also seen where a lot of these, they read like they were cut and paste, and I'm almost positive that they are. And I don't know specifically if they're by the forensic pathologists themselves, or if they're the investigator narratives, but when you read the investigator narrative, where's the accountability for the Sheriff's Department? If they're just writing the narrative, and these stories don't make any sense at all, and when you start looking at the crime scene photographs, you start looking at the autopsy photographs, and you start reading the narrative, there's absolutely no truth in what's being written. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to ask this commission to please think about accountability and transparency, and think about having oversight for this agency, because this community has felt for a very long time that they collude with the sheriffs. And I think it's time, if they want to separate themselves, they need to be more honest, take a look at the processes that aren't being worked on, and start to look at the sheriffs, what they're putting inside these autopsy reports and making people believe.
Thank you. So I do look forward to us continuing this dialogue and conversation, and all these very good questions have come forward, and from commissioners and from the public. And this is, as I said, this is an area that needs a lot of illumination. You know, part of it is that people don't want to talk about death and want to think about death in general. And so when we have issues like this, it's even a little bit harder to open up our eyes and probe and stick with it. So thanks everybody for your attention on this matter. Okay. now we're going to, it's kind of a little bit of a continuation, somewhat of a continuation. We're going to move to agenda item 2B, and this is about the in process of development family assistance program. As you know, and we've been commenting about it up to today, the commission, from our first meeting, began to hear from family members who'd lost loved ones through interactions with law enforcement, fatalities, etc. And so this has been not only on patrol, but also in custody. And so this has been it's a very sensitive, extremely important issue, and we want to develop a program that really does solve a lot of the issues. The board of Supervisors approved a motion to establish this family assistance program aimed at improving compassionate communication and providing trauma-informed support to families. So today we're going to get an update. The first person that we're going to hear from is from our very own COC analyst, Ingrid Williams. And then we're going to hear from the Department of Mental Health Deputy Director, Miriam Brown. Ms. Williams.
Good morning, everyone. Today I will be discussing the genesis of the Family Assistance Program, as well as providing a brief overview of the July 2019 motion directives. So as Chair Giggins mentioned, since its inception, the Civilian Oversight Commission has received a substantial amount of requests from the public that they review the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department's interactions with families following a fatal use of force or an in-custody death. In March 2018, the Commission formed the Family Assistance and Communication Ad Hoc Committee to identify and address systemic issues within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department that have prevented the delivery of clear, timely, and most importantly, trauma-informed communication and interactions with family. In September of 2018, the Commission unanimously approved the 7 recommendations of the Ad Hoc Committee's report. The following month, the Board of Supervisors approved a motion to direct the CEO to put together an implementation plan for said recommendations. In June 2019, the CEO submitted her report to the Board of Supervisors to establish a family assistance program. The following month, the Board of Supervisors approved a motion to direct the Department of Mental Health to establish the Family Assistance Program to ensure that families receive a trauma-informed and compassionate communication following uses of force, fatal uses of force, and in-custody deaths. So, since July, the Department of Mental Health has worked with various departments to implement and establish a family assistance program. Among them are the Department of Medical Examiner-Coroner, the Sheriff's Department, the Department of Public Health's Injury and Violence Prevention Program, the Chief Executive Office, the Office of Inspector General, County Council, the Registrar Recorder County Clerk, and the Civilian Oversight Commission. Since August of 2019, the team has worked diligently to address the following board directives. Hire family assistance advocates for the Family Assistance Program. Currently, the CEO has identified funds that will be allocated to the Department of Mental Health to help that department hire the necessary staff to get the program going. Identify leadership level staff from various county departments to establish a multidisciplinary team. All of the departments that are part of the multidisciplinary team have identified their experienced staff and assigned them as family assistance designees. Establish policies and procedures to assist with burial cost. So the implementation team right now is looking at various avenues as well as models to develop not only their eligibility criteria, but also their protocols to ensure that families receive the necessary funds. Develop policies and protocols as part of the Family Assistance Program to provide trauma-informed responses. So the Department of Public Health will work with other departments to ensure that the family assistance services are aligned with the department's violence prevention and trauma-informed work. And currently, all of the policies and protocols developed by each of the departments in the implementation team are under review. So to develop training curriculum, as I mentioned earlier, the Department of Mental Health will be working with all the other various departments. To create a website that outlines related roles of the MDT, the Mental Health Department, as well as the Chief Information Office, will be working alongside the Internal Services Department to develop the website, and the Department of Mental Health will be the one who will manage the website once it's up and running. And to finally report back to the board, in the initial year, the implementation team will be reporting back to the board quarterly and semi-annually thereafter. So some of the next steps of the implementation team are as follows: to continue moving forward towards hiring the family assistance advocates needed to provide the on-site services, to develop and approve protocols and policies for the family assistance program, to continue to meet monthly until the program is fully implemented, and to develop the family assistance website. While the implementation team has been working nonstop to develop these protocols to ensure the best family assistance program for the residents of LA County, Ms. Miriam Brown and her team have been coordinating with the MDT to provide on-site support to families following fatal deputy-related uses of force, as well as in-custody deaths since August. So right now, I'd like to turn it over to her so she could share some of her experiences with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for having us here. My name is Miriam with the Department of Mental Health. And it's a pleasure to be here and talk about the Family Assistance Program. As you heard Dr. Lucas and Ms. Williams, it's been a fast-track approach. We have been working the Family Assistance Program. The purpose of the Family Assistance Program is to oh, it's here, sorry.
Very nice.
The Family Assistance Program consists of family advocates, and basically our job is to really work with the coroner's office, with the sheriff's department, whether it's homicide or the in-custody death, with hospitals when the individuals are on the hospitals, with the families, and really support the family, friends, and anyone who is involved in that incident, to provide them with mental health services, social services, and burial expenses. What do we do when we work with the families? First of all, we work with the Sheriff's Department, the coroners, in order to coordinate the death notification. As you can imagine, this is not a really clean and neat process. Therefore, there's circumstances or situations in which cannot happen at the same time. However, we are all working together to make it happen at the same time. But sometimes it's the distance limitations, and sometimes because of the time that if there's a criminal investigation, there's a time frame that has to happen in between before we can make any contact with the family members. And we do it in a trauma-informed approach when we reach families. The purpose is also to maintain open communication, not only with the families, with all the other participant departments, in order to provide families information in a timely and in real time. That really has made the difference for families to know, what are the steps, when are we going to be able to get the body, or, information that otherwise they have difficulties getting through the system, oftentimes because they don't know the number, or because they're so traumatized and they're so in a moment of crisis that it's really hard to gather all the information when it's given to them. We are making sure that we are working with all the agencies and working with the families to make sure that they get some of the funds towards their burial contributions, So that's to help the families. At this point, we haven't finalized a step, but we are very close to do so. Number 4, it's really identify the family's mental health needs, not only the immediate family, but the loved ones that are close by, friends, families, brothers, siblings, and anybody who's within the family circle. And provide, most importantly, is the supportive services. As a mental health clinician, what I believe has worked in these instances, it's just trying to be there for support, facilitate the communication, and working with them in terms of what are their most important needs at that particular point. Because that's what really helps families to really move through the process. It's a very difficult process for them because they really cannot understand what has happened and what's going on. And finally, as we get through the process, we do move into the next phase, which is really working on providing them psychological first aid, trauma-informed care, consultation, and the goal is to connect them to services if they need and if they choose to do so. So those are the basic points of the Family Assistance Program. What we have here is some of the statistics that we have gathered. Since the inception of the program, which was August, right after the board motion, we have, as you can see there, we have 4 community officer-involved shootings. We have 2 in-custody community deaths, and we have 1 in-custody hospital. And, as you can see, the last one, in-custody jail. So we have had a total of 4 deaths so far through this program. Family response. What do we do and what's going on with the families? We try to reach the families in real time. Oftentimes, shortly after the incident, we work with the Sheriff's Department, Homicide. They call us, they let us know, they give us a time frame in terms of determine the investigation, the job of the coroners, and then we come into the picture. For example, the last one, which was last week, in the East LA area, the lieutenant from the Homicide Division called us. We immediately gathered some information, and at the point that we were ready to kind of work with the family, we were there ready and available. We met the family shortly after the detectives met with the family and talked to them about what had happened. Some families are very receptive to services. They're open. They really welcome the help. Even it's just making a phone call for them, they're receptive. Some families have completely declined services. They're very upset because of the circumstances. That's more often with the officer-involved shootings, that families really decline services, and they no longer want to speak with us or choose not to at all. We make at least a couple of phone calls, even if they decline services, but they reach a point that we don't want to really interfere with whatever plans they have chosen to make. Some other families initially have spoken with us, but then later have said we can no longer speak with you because they have retained lawyers. And we also want to be respectful of their choices and their decisions. What has worked with this? I believe that what has worked, it's really the collaboration between the coroners, sheriffs, and all the other departments. And I mentioned coroners and sheriffs because those are the 2 entities that really come into place at the time that the communication notification comes to Department of Mental Health, and when we deploy and how we interact with the coroner's office. It's work in terms of making and facilitating the phone calls that the family needs. Some families really have a hard time making decisions. Others really welcome us to their home. There has been some instances where the family has requested for us to come right before the funeral services, just to meet with the family and kind of process what are the next steps. And then we're following through after that. We have our contact person so far. It's been Charles Lennon and Paul Sacco and myself. We are kind of being managing while we hire the staff. I know hiring the staff would have been great and having it at the very beginning. However, I think that working, the three of us as managers of different programs, working directly with the departments and really finding out, all the logistics. There is policies, procedures in all departments, and finding them and really working with them to facilitate the process has been really helpful, because now when we train our two staff that we're going to be hiring, we can really kind of take them through the process. We all have policies and procedures that have to be taken into account, but now we have contact persons at each one of the departments. So that's the end of my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you so much. This is so exciting to see this evolve. And obviously you're beginning to practice it while you're developing it. It's one of those things where you fly the plane while you're building the plane. And I appreciate that your leadership is directly involved in delivering services and also helping with the policies. As you say, that's certainly a way to get the kinks, as many kinks out, and for leadership to know what that is before it gets completely formally launched. How much longer will it be before you have you're going to start with 2 and then I imagine just see what the need is moving forward with the family assistance advocate. So how much longer do you think it will be before you have those 2 folks up and ready to go?
We're hoping by that we're already in November. There's so many holidays, November and December. So I would say February. We're aiming for February. We're beginning the interviewing process, but we're hoping for February.
And these folks will be available 24/7, or they'll rotate, or how will that work?
We're going to have to rotate, because when we first start about the program, it's 2 people. But based on experience, you cannot be 24/7 for this type of work. So we will have some of us will be on call, and then we deploy the clinicians. But we're going to have to do, some sort of schedule on, who's going to be the officer of the day to gather the information.
Okay. Want to open it up for questions from commissioners and Inspector General?
If I could just add something, the question of how many people should be involved is one that I think this body should revisit at the appropriate time. For the point that Miriam just made, which is that what you need is 24/7 response that needs to be immediate in order to engage families so that they don't feel that this is too little too late when you do show up. But also you need the follow-up. As you've just heard from the coroner's office, obviously this is a program that I think is going to catalyze great change within the county. Although you haven't seen it, homicide detectives have been involved directly with this process of planning and have been very engaged and very cooperative. But of course, from a homicide investigative point of view, you don't want information going out because it doesn't help you in any way. But they're engaging and learning, and I think that having that staff be around not just in the middle of the night, but then to follow up with the burial cost issues, which we've been working on, with the communication issues, is going to be critical. So I would ask this body to consider at the appropriate time weighing in on whether or not it should be more than 2 bodies in DMH. But I do think I want to applaud Miriam in particular, who my staff has worked with, and I worked with a little, doing an incredible job at pushing this forward, as well as the Sheriff's Department, the homicide folks in particular, but not only, have really engaged, and of course the Medical Examiner's Office have been very proactive in jumping into this. I know from the rest of the world's perspective, it seems like we're slow, and we are, but for county, that's county light speed, that they've jumped in before the board followed up with another motion actually creating the program. But I think this body, if it believes it's a good idea, which I think it does, should push for more than 2 bodies.
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's no question that our commission, and I don't think it's going to be a very big lift for the Board of Supervisors to support this. I mean, so much groundwork has been done. This is a grassroots idea that now has developed into a full-on 5, 6, 7 department collaboration. You called it the multidisciplinary team. And I don't think anyone, I have not heard anyone say that the issues that come up cannot be solved. They're really working at it so that it will work well. And I believe that there's going to be so much shared knowledge that the problem solving that will come actually much quicker once all this preliminary groundwork is done. But I mean, I feel like this is a flagship program for the COC. I think it will be a flagship program for the county. And I think the community-based organizations are going to continue their due diligence, their engagement, to also make sure that it's the most respectful, trauma-informed, transparent, considerate, compassionate program that we probably have. That's my editorializing. But Bonner, Commissioner Bonner?
Well, first of all, I certainly agree with the Inspector General that we should get an assessment of the projected staffing levels that you think are necessary to implement the Family Assistance Program. And perhaps that's 2 FTE, but may well be more. So if you would report back to us on that. But I also had another question, and that is, once the Family Assistance Program is fully implemented, I'm wondering what thought has been given to what sort of measures or metrics could be used to discuss whether the program's been successful or not. And I'm not expecting you to answer that right now, unless you can, by the way, but I would like, when you come back, I mean, I think some thought has to be given to how do we measure success here. And secondly, I guess maybe I have a question here. I guess I'm a little bit taken aback and hadn't really given a lot of thought to the fact that, part of not all of it, part of the purpose of this is fatal use of force incidents. And it sounds like, at least preliminarily, that in almost all of those situations, the family, under advice of counsel, is not accepting family assistance. Is that correct so far? And I realize we have a very limited database at this point, but could you respond to that, Ms. Brown?
So far, that's been the case, with the exception on one, simply because that particular case, the person was coming from, I believe, from Northern California. Parents live in Mexico. The family had to come here, so a lot of arrangements were made. So with that particular family, we worked very closely to work with the family, because their wish, first of all, the next of kin was out of the country. So the Sheriff's Department, the coroners was pretty instrumental, which gave me a great deal of information. It was educational for me, myself, to really know the paperwork and what areas needed to be completed by the family. So with that particular case, we did a lot of work. We worked with the family. We worked with the Mexican consulate in order to get the body transferred to Mexico. And, I did follow up with the sister who lives here in the United States, but she said, that's, my brother, it's fine. Thank you very much for all your assistance. But in all the other cases, they declined services.
Any other questions or comments? I imagine as this process evolves, that families who now at this point are being advised by lawyers to not receive services, I think once it's understood and community trusts that there's that these services are going to be, how can I say that? These services should not impact any kind of legal actions that they may take, and should not influence any kind of legal actions they take. So it's, I'm sure that's not going to be across the board, but I envision that there will probably be more families that will also want to participate as it evolves.
This is sort of connecting the coroner's presentation and this presentation, but we had raised this previously, and I'm hoping someone here, perhaps Assistant Sheriff Gross can weigh in here, or even Commander Marks. The issue of putting the hold on all information. I think I'm clear, and probably everyone here in this horseshoe is pretty clear. In a typical homicide case, I think we all can see where that probably is very appropriate. But I'm wondering just what the policy is, if there is a policy. I think the practice is, and I can be corrected, please, if I'm wrong, that in officer-involved, deputy-involved shootings or death, anything involving a death at the hands of law enforcement, there's an automatic freeze put on releasing any information. And I'm kind of wondering if that is necessary. It would seem in some of those cases, not all of them, of course, but in some of those cases, the facts are pretty well known real early on. There's not a huge amount of investigation that has to occur when there's been a deputy-involved shooting. I'm not saying there doesn't need to be an investigation, but I'm saying the facts surrounding it are probably fairly well established. And I guess what I'm hearing from the public is that one of their areas of frustration is it takes so long for them to get the coroner's report released, when I think their position, and I think many people's position, would be, what is there in dispute about the coroner's report that needs to be held back? Now, there are going to be circumstances when that is appropriate for a variety of reasons, but I'm just wondering if why is that? Is it automatic? And is there some level of review, i.e. the homicide lieutenant says, bam, I'm putting a hold on all this stuff. Okay, thank you, homicide lieutenant. Is there at a point where you say, okay, a week into this now, 2 weeks into this now, is that decision reviewed to see, is that still valid? Perhaps it was totally valid the first day, 2 week, month, but is there a point where someone above that homicide lieutenant maybe takes a look at this and goes, maybe at this stage of the game we could release this information? And I know there will be those circumstances when, no, you can't do that. But I'm just wondering, is there, and again, I'm thinking this is probably more appropriate. The answer needs to come not from TMH or the coroner's office, but more from the sheriff's department. Are these things just automatic? Sounds like they pretty much are, which I can pretty much understand. But is there some room for looking at these things perhaps in a more timely fashion, where we could see, is it still in fact necessary to keep these things under lock and key, or can they be released to the family as opposed to just waiting for whenever? If it's a situation where we're waiting to get information, and I apologize for being kind of long-winded here, because I am, but this will take us into another little area of if we're waiting for, we can't release it because the investigation is still ongoing, because we're still waiting for a decision from the district attorney on whether or not we're going to file charges, and therefore we can't interview the deputies until that decision is made. You can see how this gets all balled up in this gigantic mess, that I'm just wondering if there isn't some way we could maybe kind of start peeling off some of the layers of the onion here and seeing that there's some ways we could maybe, in some circumstances, fix part of this. So that's a rather long statement and or a question with a whole bunch in there. So good luck with that.
Is there a question in there?
Yeah.
I like your statement.
There is a question. There is a question. And it's going back, I'll go back to the original premise of this whole dissertation, which is there always the absolute need to lock down all this reports, particularly the coroner's report? And if so, is there some way we could look at perhaps accelerating the release of that, specific in deaths that are at the hands of law enforcement?
If I could just state it, though, we're requesting of the sheriff and the sheriff's department that they provide us they provide us what their current policy is and do a policy review as to whether or not when a security or investigative hold can be released, whether it should be, whether it's automatic, and then whether there's some review process as to when, at the earliest point in time, it could be removed. Thank you.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with the Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Commission. That was a lot of loaded information there. I'm gonna say, as you asked, that we will review our policy and report back with you so that it can be most accurate. But I would give the perspective that the coroner gave you, which is they're determining the cause and manner of death, and that's sensitive information to a homicide investigation. And so there would be reasons very often that we would want to keep that information from the public because of the fact that we don't want people to have that information and then have to be interviewed or affect the investigation. So I think you see that as this discussion was taking place, I was thinking another perspective on this too will be SB 1421, where we're going to be releasing this information anyway if it's requested. So when the homicide investigation is finished and this is requested through SB 1421, the coroner's report would be in that information. So it wouldn't be us holding that information, and that would all be transparent on that issue. So this might be something that, although there may be some delays because of investigative matters, and we'll find out what the exact policy is, and I can guess that it does happen quite often because of those two very sensitive issues that we wouldn't want getting out. I would tell you that ultimately the officer involved shooting would be able to be requested under 1421, and that would ultimately clear this up. And the question that may need to be asked for the coroner's office is on their own side of the house on what they could release through being able to redact and stuff like that. So they might have to look at their own policies as well. But I understand what he said about the law.
And if I could add to that, to what Assistant Sheriff Gross is mentioning, under what we refer to as SB 1421, which is now Penal Code Section 832.7, there are very specific restrictions on the ability of law enforcement or any agency with public records relating to a shooting to refuse to disclose them. And they initially are strong for law enforcement, but at 60 days, it changes, and there's a requirement of written reasons. So 60 days after a shooting, I think the presumption of the law is the information comes out and it's no longer, as Commissioner Harris is pointing out, that at that point you've had the opportunity to do what you need to do, and information can come out unless there is an active action by the agency, and they have to state their reasons in writing. And I believe it's probably subject to litigation. I mean, ultimately, I think County Council will be giving you some information because it dovetails with what the coroner is talking about, but it requires a new look at these things which have had a procedure for years and years and years that now needs to change in some regard. But all those points made by Assistant Sheriff Gross and Commissioner Harris are of course certainly correct. But there's a way in which it's not just, whenever the investigation's done, and then we'll let you know. That's the old version. The new version, some of the points of view expressed here have actually been written down into law.
Very good. Okay. Any other questions for Miriam Brown? Comments?
Could I clarify one thing? I received a text about this from somebody watching. With respect to the burial costs, that part of the program has not triggered yet. It's anticipated. DMH has been working on it with the other agencies, but it hasn't yet been actually activated. So when we were talking about willingness of families to receive assistance, it's more assistance with finding information at this point and the coordination. And so the issue of the legal issues kicks in more. At some point, we hope that burial cost issue will be a little more routine. We'll work through with when the medical examiner releases the body, then that we can write a check to the funeral home or whatever that has the actual expense, and then that gets done through DMH is the plan. But that hasn't happened yet. So
right. I understand the problem is who is the we writing the check. I understand that still hasn't been formulated yet.
I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is county bureaucracy and the process to actually make it law and rules. the question of who will write the check, I've always already said in this group that OIG is happy to do it if nobody else will. Because there has been some bureaucratic concern about how the heck does that happen, and my position has been I don't care about the bureaucracy of it. We'll make it happen. But we still need to get authority for it.
Right, very good, very good. Okay.
Thank you.
Do you have any other comment?
No, I think Commissioner Bonner asked two questions, number of staff. So far, based on what we have seen in 3 months, it's more likely that we will need more than 2 staff, and also that we will need a bilingual clinician on board, because we have had quite a few Spanish-speaking families. In terms of the metrics, we're going to be working on that. It's just moving so quick, but that's one of our next steps along with the website. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I just also want to appreciate you, Dr. Brown, and your department, because I know that you also staff when we have our town halls. I don't know, many times you've personally come to assist the community in terms of if they need some counseling or some assistance. So you've already proven the efficacy of the clinical approach, the social worker approach to these law enforcement issues. So thank you so much. Now we're going to have some public comment.
We have one speaker, David Schwade.
Thank you so much. My name is David Schwade. I'm the executive director of a new nonprofit called Eternal Freedom Project. Our mission is to bring healing to the community in the area of death and dying in custody, and that's local, state, and federal. It's really a holistic approach to end-of-life issues for system-involved people and their loved ones. And as I hear about what's going on, I guess the thing that keeps coming to my mind is comfort the mourner. We're very supportive of the Family Assistance Program. As I'm sitting here, I'm reminded that my own father, my dad, was killed by a City of Los Angeles garbage truck back in 1998. Hadn't even thought about it. He was in an electric cart. There were no curb cuts. So excuse me, I'm a little shaky about that. I think what's most important is that the families be treated with compassion, with transparency, and with comfort. I think it's important also that notification be in person, maybe using the model of how the military notifies the families of those who have died in service to our country. I know no matter who connects with the family, whether it's from Department of Mental Health, Department of Health Services, Sheriff's Department, they should never be adversarial. They should never act in a way to humanize the victim or their loved ones. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Any other speakers? Okay, thank you all. We're going to take 15 minutes? About a 15-minute break, does that sound right? And we'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Thank you.